Good afternoon. I'm Yanika Mills, Principal Planner with the Hillsborough City County Planning Commission. I would like to acknowledge the other Planning Commission staff that are also attending, Mr. Sean College, as well as Mr. Tony Garcia. Additionally, I'd also like to thank the EPC staff as well as the property appraiser staff for collaborating with us on this meeting. The purpose of today's workshop is to follow up on some questions that the Planning Commission had from their March 8th workshop regarding the proposed environmentally sensitive land credit proposal. So the Planning Commission staff has asked that EPC staff and the property appraiser staff to participate in this joint meeting. This joint meeting will serve as an opportunity for the Planning Commission to further gather information from the EPC and property appraiser staff on the proposal for CPA 2104 text amendment. Next slide, please, Lynn. Just so everyone is familiar with the flow of the meeting and how everything will kind of work today, everyone's audio will be muted during the meeting unless you are a speaker. We do have stakeholders that are present on the meeting. However, they will be in listen mode only. The stakeholders have provided questions ahead of today's meeting to be addressed. I will give a short staff presentation, and then we will move to ask questions of both the Environmental Protection Commission as well as property appraiser staff. Then we will open the floor to the planning commissioners to ask questions and receive feedback from EPC and property appraiser staff. This meeting will be posted on YouTube as well as a project page for CPA 2104, just in case anyone needs to refer back to it. Next slide. Just to give you some background, the concept of the environmentally sensitive land credit has been in the unincorporated Hillsborough County Comprehensive Plan in some format since the 1989 unincorporated Hillsborough Comprehensive Plan. In the 1994 evaluation and appraisal report by the state, the language and the method for calculating the credit was revised to the language that's currently within the comprehensive plan. So in December of 2020, the Board of County Commissioners requested a Planning Commission staff, as well as the Development Services staff and the County Attorney's Office to coordinate and prepare amendments to the future land use element of the comprehensive plan and the land development code in order to eliminate the environmentally sensitive land credit, better known as the wetland density credit within the rural area. The proposed text amendment was initiated with the thought that by removing the wetland density credit, it would serve as an opportunity to protect sensitive rural areas and environmental areas, as well as would strengthen the county's TDR program. Next slide, please, Lionel. So the environmentally sensitive land credit, it's found within the future land use element of the unincorporated Hillsborough Comprehensive Plan within policy 13.3. The policy is basically a calculation that allows for parcels that contain 25% or over of wetlands to have the potential to receive a 25% increase of density or intensity on their site. The caveat to this, though, is that the amount of wetlands is formally delineated and administered by the Environmental Protection Commission to get an accurate density and intensity potential. So currently, if you have a parcel that contains below 25% wetlands, the calculation is based on the entire project acreage. However, if your parcel contains over 25% wetlands, the calculation is based on upland acreage and given a 25% increase in intensity or density. Next slide, please, Lionel. So under the new proposed revision, it is recommended that the policy language be modified so that whether a parcel contains over 25% wetlands or under 25% wetlands, but those parcels within the rural area that calculation would now be based upon net developable land area as opposed to gross acreage. Next slide. So here's an example of what the calculation would look like with the credit and without the credit. On a 100-acre parcel, the future land use classification of residential 2, and that contains at least 25% wetlands, without the wetland density credit, would be eligible for a potential to develop 150 units. However, on that same parcel, with a future land use designation of residential 2, and that contains over 25% wetlands, that parcel would have the potential to receive a maximum of 187 dwelling units with the wetland density credit. A difference of 37 units would possibly be eliminated with the proposed policy change. Next slide, please. So we've been receiving some great questions from many of the stakeholders involved in this process, and I wanted to answer some of those questions today. One of those questions was, what are the growth trends in the urban service area versus the rural area? So this graphic shows us a comparison of the residential permits that have been issued in the urban service area versus the rural area from 2019 to 2020. This comparison is important because it shows that not much development activity has been taking place within the rural area, which is the area that this proposed amendment would affect. Next slide, please. We also had a request to understand the parcel sizes within the rural area. So this map gives us a depiction as well as guidance as to the parcel sizes within the rural area. Next slide. So this graph depicts the breakdown of the map from the previous slide. And from this, you can see there are a large number of parcels within the rural area that are over 100 acres and greater. Next slide. Staff has also been asked about the amount of acreage that is going to be affected by this proposal. So we ran the numbers, and in our initial assessment, there are approximately over 372,000 acres within the rural area. And we found that a little over 93,000 of that acreage contains wetlands. So from here, staff has to now take this wetland acreage, break it down by each future land use classification, and then from there we can make a calculation as to find out the potential number of units that would possibly be eliminated with this proposal. We are still trying to make that calculation as far as the number of units potential loss goes. So staff realizes that there were many other questions that were sent in. We are still, again, gathering and formulating data for this amendment. Just know that we are getting to those other questions as we continue to gather data. Next slide, please, Lynn. So the next steps in this process for proposed amendment, there will be a July 20th Board of County Commissioners workshop. I'll be back before the Planning Commission on September 14th for a public hearing, and a BOCC transmittal hearing later on that same month. And it's due to go before the Board of County Commissioners for final adoption hearing on December 9th. Next slide, please, Lynn. So if you have any further questions, maybe regarding this presentation or regarding the amendment at all, there's the link to the project page, or of course there's my contact information, or you can email me with any further questions. Thank you. So now we are going to, again, as I stated, we have a number of questions that were sent from stakeholders that we would like to ask that the Environmental Protection Commission, as well as the Property Appraiser's Office, do their best to address these questions from the stakeholders. I'm first going to ask questions of the EPC staff, and then I'll move on to ask questions that were sent in that relate to the property appraiser's office. Okay. Okay, first question to be addressed to the EPC staff. What a wetland and how are they protected, and if those amendment, can you address that, please?
I'm sorry, my computer was breaking up a little bit. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. The question was asked, a wetland, what is a wetland, excuse me, how they are protected, and if and how the proposed amendment will affect wetlands.
Okay. So first of all, the wetlands are delineated pursuant to Florida Administrative Code 62-340, and it is a state methodology to delineate a wetland or an other surface water. There are three main characteristics of a wetland. One of them is wetland vegetation. So vegetation that is specifically adapted to survive in water environments. Second one is soils, hydric soils. These are soils that have hydric or indicators that show that they are inundated for a certain period of time. And then the third one is hydrology, how often the water stands there or ponds there, and evidence of that, such as stain lines, which is a very good indicator that you can see on the river. In order to be claimed a wetland, you need two of those three criteria. And again, that is the state methodology that controls how a wetland is delineated for Florida. How are wetlands protected? Here at EPC, we have a wetlands rule, chapter 1-11. We also have a basis of review that complements 111, going into a little more detail about what our wetland regulations are. Basically, wetlands are protected in Hillsborough County unless there are certain circumstances where they need to be impacted for reasonable use of a property. And you may say, well, what is reasonable use of a property? A typical example is if you have a piece of property that you need to access to buildable uplands in the back of the property, and you have to cross a creek or stream or wetland to get to the back of the property, then we would allow you to impact the wetland to gain access to buildable uplands through our wetland impact and mitigation process. Because here in the state of Florida, specifically in Hillsborough County, we have a no net loss policy of wetlands. So if you impact a wetland, you need to mitigate for the wetland as well. And the third part of your question is, will this density credit change affect the delineation of wetlands? No, it will not, because the state of Florida only uses those three criteria to delineate a wetland, does not use anything else. It's all science-based, not land use based.
Thank you. The next question from one of the stakeholders was, can you please explain wetland setbacks? Are they different for agricultural versus development properties?
Yes, that's a very good question. Here at EPC, we do not have setback regulations. Setbacks are regulated by Development Services with Hillsborough County. That's in their Natural Resources Department. And then you have three cities within Hillsborough County that also have their own setback regulations. So for Hillsborough County Development Service, Natural Resources, they have two setbacks. One of them is 30 feet for conservation areas, which is very broadly categorized as freshwater. There's certain community types that are listed in the land development code, but for generalization purposes, we could go with freshwater. And there's a 50-foot setback for, again, general purposes saltwater. For the different cities, most of them have a 25-foot setback. For agricultural sites, according to the codes that I'm aware of, I do not believe there's a different setback for agricultural sites. When you get into the realm of ag swim and ag permitting for those types of developments, a lot of times if the farmer provides a 50-foot buffer or setback, I believe there's less detailed permitting involved, because you basically are saying you're giving a bigger buffer from your development activity from the wetland. But again, those regulations are not EPC.
Thank you. Can you please address the costs of wetland delineations? How will this work with parcels that are hundreds of acres? The cost of delineations are very high, around tens of thousands of dollars. That is a concern that should be considered.
So right now, for delineations, the process is we have our delineations based on acreages, and I'm looking at our fee schedule now. It's on our website. It's 1-6. And so properties for less than 1 acre are $200. 1 to 3 acres is $270. 3 to 10 acres is $460. 10 to 40 acres is $810. 40 to 100 acres is $1,420. And then anything over an additional 100 acres is an additional $280 per 100 acres. So let me explain what that covers. That covers the EPC scientist going on site and either hanging flags at the wetland line based on that state methodology I discussed, or the property owner hires a consultant to hang the flags and EPC goes to verify. It is up to the property owner to get that line surveyed, and they put it on a boundary survey. They submit it to EPC for review. We sign off on it. It will be valid for 5 years, and that is what is used for construction plans. So the tens of thousands of dollars I could see for the surveying cost for sure if it's a large piece of property, but for the EPC delineation fee, it's what I just outlined from chapter 1-6.
Next question. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I just wanted Kim to talk about that SwiftMud and FDEP also set wetland lines. Could you touch on that, Kim?
Sure, definitely. So the DEP is also setting wetland lines. With the DEP and SwiftMud job split, DEP is in charge of single-family homes and linear projects such as large power distribution lines. SwiftMud is in charge of subdivisions, very large subdivision projects, and commercial projects. Right now, what's interesting that has happened is that the DEP has gotten, I call it delegation, that's not the term that they use, but delegation from the Army Corps to issue some Army Corps permits to do those reviews and permitting. And that's through chapter 404. So these 404 permits, the DEP goes out and evaluates the wetland line. So right now, if you were to go to SwiftMud to get a wetland delineation, they would partner with DEP so that both of those agencies will go on site to evaluate the wetland line for permitting purposes.
Okay. Next question. Does EPC consider the number of units that would be yielded in the process of delineating wetlands?
No, because again, the review criteria for delineating a wetland are those 3 scientific criterias: land use, density credits. None of that is factored into the delineation of a wetland.
Okay. It was noted by EPC that regardless of who owns the property, whether it is an agricultural owner or a developer, wetlands are protected in all areas of Hillsborough County by the EPC. What is the purpose of removing the wetland density credit from unincorporated Hillsborough County when there isn't a negative impact to the environment or an abundance of density to begin with? I'm not sure. We can answer that one.
Yeah, I think that would be a question for y'all. We didn't initiate anything to do with the density credit topic discussion, so I would not have that answer.
Next question was, please explain the EPC review process for subdividing parcels.
So for the subdividing of parcels, that again falls into the wheelhouse of development services or the 3 municipalities. We comment on those reviews, but that is not something that we have in our rules specifically to go through the process of subdividing. That's again a property use. What we do for commenting on those types of reviews is we look to make sure that there's not going to be wetland impacts as a result of the subdivision. So typically, if it's a certified parcel where it's just the splitting of 2 properties, a wetland delineation is not required. We just want to ensure that the one that you're splitting off isn't going to be 100% wetland that's going to need a wetland impact in the future. If you do 3 or more, that's typically called a platted subdivision or a final plat. And that is where you need to provide access to those lots. So we want to make sure that the access to those lots are not going to impact wetlands. And again, that all the lots involved are not being separated out so they're 100% wetlands. And that's what we review and comment back on to the county.
Okay, next question. Are man-made ditches and ponds considered wetlands? Do they have to be delineated as wetlands?
So that again is a very good question. Based on the delineation criteria, the answer is yes, pursuant to 62-340. It does not look at how the wetland got there. It only looks at the science of the wetland on site today. So what's interesting, if you follow the history of how wetlands have been delineated throughout time, prior to the state adopting 62-340, different governmental agencies delineated wetlands how they thought they should be delineated. For Hillsborough County at EPC, we did not delineate artificially created ditches. We knew that they were artificially created, and so we did not claim them as wetlands. In 1994, when 340 was mandated that everyone change their methodology to all match, which is a good thing that everybody's matching the same methodology. We noticed the issue that now we were having to claim these man-made ditches. So we created, back at that time, it was called the Executive Director Authorization, where even though we had to claim it as a wetland, we would exempt it from our regulation. And then in 2007, we were able to codify that, and it's what we commonly refer to as our noticed exemptions now. So yes, even though we do have to claim them based on state rule, we do exempt upland cut man-made ditches and upland cut man-made ponds that are less than an acre and all fish ponds.
Thank you. This question may actually relate to an earlier question, but I'm going to read it anyway. It reads, if the wetland density credit was changed to net upland acreage, would this reduce the number of times a property can be subdivided if wetlands are present?
That would be a good question for development services staff. Because again, in the wetlands division, we do not subdivide properties.
Okay. Those are the questions that I have right now for EPC staff. Is there any additional information that you would like to offer us regarding this amendment or that you would like to speak on?
I would just reiterate the comments that we had provided in writing, that the different ownership or land use, none of that changes the fact that wetlands are protected by EPC. So wetlands are going to be continued to be protected no matter how the density credits are calculated or who owns or uses the property. Chapter 111 of the EPC rules is going to protect that wetland.
Thank you very much for answering those questions.
Thank you.
I'm now going to move on to some questions that we had for the property appraiser's office. The first question is, or it may be more of a statement, this proposal will diminish our borrowing power to borrow money to grow our crops and might lead to less agriculture in the community as farmers. Can you comment on that for property appraiser staff? Can you comment on that, please?
Yes, ma'am. When we look at the market value of a piece of property, we're looking at what we would call the highest and best use, which is that use that generates the highest return to the property over time. And if there were lands that were currently having the enjoying the density credit, and the property was being valued based on its ability to be developed for future use, then this would in fact have an impact on value. That value would then diminish their borrowing capacity from a lending institution. The biggest thing to keep in mind is the highest and best use issue, which says in this particular location, given the supply and demand within the marketplace, is the density an issue or not for this particular piece of ground? That can only be answered on an individual case-by-case basis and would be a function of the economy and the players in the market that were present at any point in time. To bring it down though, if I had two lots sitting next to each other and one can be developed into 10 lots, the one next door, same size, can be developed into 20 lots because of the credit. Certainly the one that can develop to 20 lots is going to sell for more than the one with only 10 lots.
Thank you. The next question is, can you please explain tax use codes versus future land use, how they differ?
Okay. With that particular question, I'm not sure if the person asking was meaning tax use codes or maybe land use codes. We don't have anything called a tax use code, so I'm assuming it's the land use codes that we have. All of the land in the county is given a land use code that determines how the property will be valued. There's different codes for acreage, for square feet, front feet, and so on, as far as units of comparison on land. So again, the land use code tells us how we're going to value the property. The future land use is something I believe your office maintains. We do not look to any future use on property. Our lien date, our valuation date would be January 1 of each year, and we don't look forward as to what might be developed at some point in time. So forecasting is not part of our procedure here.
Thank you. The next question was, does the property appraiser consider the potential density of the property for property tax purposes?
Okay. When we look at the market value of the property, there are 5 techniques for valuing land. The first and best is by sales comparison. In other words, looking what properties sell for per unit in the current economy and making assumptions then as to what the price per unit would be for those properties that have not sold. When we look at those properties, we do take into consideration zoning. We take into consideration any restrictions that might be on the property itself. We consider the location and the potential to which the property could be developed given current law and conditions. So we only consider the density to the point that the buying public would consider the density. So when a property transacts, when we have a sale, we try and contact the buyer and the seller to find out their rationale for buying the property itself. What was their motivation? If the motivation was in fact for future development, then we understand that the density comes into play and is part of the equation of that value. If when we talk to somebody, they purchased the property and there was no consideration for development and so forth, then we look at that sale price and the price per unit, and we do not consider the density as part of that equation.
Okay. The next question was, please explain the difference between the acreage classes 1 through 10. Which acreage classes carry the highest value? Which acreage class is the most predominant in the rural service area?
Okay. The acreage classes that we have are labels. They don't really relate one to another. In mass appraisal, we have to have accommodations for different size and value properties. In reality, those 10 acreage classes that are being referred to probably represent over 70 different property types, classifications within there. And they're just labels. So any property, for example, in Hillsborough County that would sell for $10,000 an acre would all be going back to the property class and using that label as we go through and value the property. Each property itself may have multiple sets of property classes on it. So to look at the property classes, then we combine them so that the sum is what the final value is of the different classifications that are there, which can lead to literally thousands of combinations, to look at. In looking at how many there are or what the predominant one is in the rural service area would be something that would take a bit more research to try and do, because we'd have to take each one of those summations and break them apart and then try and classify which one is used more often on part of the acreage than another type is. I don't mean to be misleading or trying to be vague here. It's just that, so like in the one classifications, there could be at least 10 different class types in there. But again, it's a label, not it's not relative one class to another. They're simply place cards in our database that can contain different property values on a per unit basis.
Okay, thank you. Next question was, are smaller parcels more valuable than larger parcels on a price per acre basis, i.e. 1 acre versus 5 acres or 10 acres versus 20 acres?
Okay. Once again, I'm going to give you two different answers. First one being there's something called economies of scale, which we all understand and all work with. It's the reason we go to Costco or Sam's Club or big box to buy, toilet paper by the pallet load instead of buying, the 4-pack from the grocery store. As you consume more or as you purchase more units, typically the price per unit tends to decline. So looking strictly at economies of scale for any set of acreage, as the acreage gets larger, typically the price per unit, it would decrease, or square foot if it was a residential lot. But the other thing you have to consider is there's something called increasing and decreasing returns as an economic principle, that if the optimum size for being purchased or developed was 5 acres, then each additional land unit until you reach 5 acres would add value to the price per unit. Once you hit that, let's say this 5-acre tract, any additional unit after 5 acres then would bring less return, and so your return on your cost invested would diminish. So typically you would say yes, there are economies of scale so that 1 acre price is worth more per acre than 5 acres. But again, there's this term of increasing and decreasing returns, where if you have an optimal size, they'll actually increase in price per unit until you reach the optimal size. Then it would start to decline again after that point.
Thank you.
Sure.
The next question reads, although it may not affect the annual property taxes, if a 10-acre parcel is no longer able to subdivide into 5-acre parcels, would value be reduced?
Again, I'm going to go back to, we have to analyze what the market is doing, the buyers and sellers, supply and demand side of the marketplace. It depends on how many, or the lot size that's in demand by the consumer at that point in time in that particular location. So the fact that you can't break it from 10 to 5 because maybe it's less than 10 at that point is not by itself a reason enough to say, yeah, the property value is going to be diminished. If the optimum site is 5 acres and you can't break from 10 to 5, then yeah, then we'd have to take a look at that. But everything that we do year in and year out, actually weekly, we produce reports that we're analyzing this interaction between the buyers and sellers so we can try and take a hold of it. Unfortunately, appraisal is not like accounting where 2 plus 2 is 4 and that's always going to be true. We have to try and analyze the purpose behind the actions of the buyers and the sellers. Because buyers and sellers aren't always rational or think maybe the way we do, because they make movements in trends and so on, we constantly are trying to figure out what's the motivation behind the players in this particular transaction. Why did they spend what they did? What were they looking for, and so on. So it's not a point of just saying if I go from one 10-acre tract and I could split it to 5 and now I'm under 10, so I can't split it to 5. Does that hurt my value? Possibly, but maybe people are looking for 9-acre tracts and not 5-acre tracts, in which case it doesn't impact the land value negatively. It truly is a function of the supply and demand in the market in that location at that time.
Okay. The next question is, do you know how many parcels exist within the rural service area with lowland use codes?
Yes. We have around 67,000 properties, I think. I don't have that number out in the in that service area, there are 6,212 parcels that have wetlands that are in the rural service area.
The next question is, can you clarify if the property appraiser considers density potential within the valuation process of land?
Yeah, I think that's kind of similar to the other question before, and that is if the buyers in the marketplace are concerned with density as far as the reason for purchasing property, then yes, it comes into play. If someone's looking at property and that's not part of the equation, then it was not going to be one of the characteristics that we would consider. But certainly in land that is being sought for development purposes, the density will have an impact on the value. And if you reduce the density, it will have an impact on the final value of that property.
So we kind of have a follow-up question regarding values.
Sure.
So if the proposed amendment would have a negative impact on property values, how the reduced property values may negatively impact the agriculture industry?
I think what they're looking at is, does it impact their borrowing power against their acreage? And again, I have to go back. If it has a negative impact because of the buyers and sellers that are in the marketplace at the particular time, what it would do would be diminish their ability to leverage that land into cash for operations. So it would diminish their, if the property value was seen to diminish because of the lesser density, then what would happen with a lower price per acre as they go to try and leverage that acreage to borrow funds for other investment, it would be diminished. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That was my last question for you. And I did forget to mention the EPC staff that was answering the questions. That was Kim Tapley. And from the property appraisers who was answering the questions was Pat, is it Andrencini?
Allison Drini.
Thank you.
Hey, you is fine. It's all
right. With that, I would like to open up the floor to the planning commissioners for questions of EPC staff and the property appraisers staff. You're muted, Nigel. Can't hear.
Do you want me to run the question and answer?
Sure. If you
Okay.
you all have any questions of the EPC staff and property appraiser staff, you all can ask those at this time.
All right, I'll go ahead and recognize Commissioner Powell to go ahead with his questions or comments. Got any?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really great presentation, Unica. Thank you so much for that. A few of my starting questions are, if I understand correctly, the total number of acreage that from the slide was 372,000 and change, and there was a little over 93,000 and change that were rural. So that to me computes about 25% of the land in the rural area is, going to be some sort of wetland type of, or has wetlands on it. Of all of those acreages, though, do we know the total number of parcels that are in the rural service area that make up that total acreage, and what percentage or what amount of those total parcels have wetlands on them? I think that's pretty critical to know.
We do not have a final number on that at this time. However, I can be prepared to answer that when I come back before you all at the Planning Commission public hearing.
Okay, all right, that would be great.
I just want to clarify that the numbers that y'all are using are approximate because they are not the delineation based on the state methodology 62340. So I just want to make sure that the folks listening in are aware of that, because the 62340 methodology involves boots on the ground where we have to go out on site and inspect the wetlands, and then the wetland line is only valid for 5 years because wetlands do change over time. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yes, thank you for that
Kim. I
clarification.
appreciate that.
From our count, and again, these are approximates because we can't be absolute, but roughly there are 65,193 properties in the rural service area, and and out of that we had 6,212 from our records that they've been told has some form of a wetland.
Okay, so about roughly 10% of those properties are going to have some sort of wetlands on them.
Approximately, yes, sir.
Okay, all right. And with all of these properties in the rural service area, these are going to all be outside of the USA, correct?
That's correct. This is referring to properties outside of the urban service area.
Okay, so I guess a question or a thought to have to everyone is, I'm not very sure why this was brought forth by the Board of County Commissioners. So I mean, I have an idea, but I'm not exactly sure the full reasoning behind this. When you're in the urban surface area, outside the urban service area, you can't go to maximum development anyway. You can't get super high density out there. So I don't really understand why we might be looking at taking away, density that they can't already have to begin with. And I know that some of my fellow commissioners, and I'd like an education on this, have said in previous meetings that rooftops destroy wetlands, and if that is the case, I'd love to understand how that actually happens and how the EPC and Swift Mud allow those things to happen, as well as it relates to density, because when you're outside the rural service area, in the rural service area, and you're outside the USA, you can't get a ton of density out there. So I'd love someone to sort of explain that to me, and I don't think that might be able to be done here, but at our public hearing, that would be something to better understand. So that way everyone just has a better understanding of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell. Looks like we had Commissioner Dix also possibly, who disappeared a little bit, but maybe has something to say. Oh, not hearing him. Well, I will. Oh, there he is.
Yeah, thank
Please
you,
go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman. I appreciate it. First of all, Ms. Mills, you did, as always, a very fine job. Your presentation was so well prepared that you went through it very quickly, and I respect that. But I don't have a copy of that, and I'd really like to have a copy of it. And I suspect that my fellow commissioners would as well, and also many of the public, because there's so many stats and figures in there. One of the ones that was in there was most telling, and it was centering around a property, hypothetical, 75 acres, currently could have up to 150 units if it was 2 units per acre. And again, I'm speaking from memory, so forgive me if I missed the numbers a second. That would be if the current proposal were enacted, but presently it could have about 187 units. So clearly taking away 37 units potential on that property. Now we heard from the property appraiser, in essence, that reducing the density on a on a given property would reduce the value of the property and also reduce the potential for leverage in borrowing money. So simply, it would seem logical to me that there's no argument that could be made that this would not have a potential to have a reduction in value, which some people could say would be a taking of the property, which creates a potential liability for the county. Because I really have two questions in this. And number one is, there was a question that was posed when Ms. Tapley was speaking, and she said, I really don't have an answer to that because the EPC is going to protect the property regardless of whether you would allow 150 units or 187. And I respect that. They do a wonderful job. Well, if it's not the wetlands that we're concerned about because they're doing a great job, what's the rationale for this? I've not heard anyone talk about why it should be done. You know, there's all kinds of questions and comments about you know, what the impact may be of reduction of values, et cetera. But nobody has said anything to me about this really needs to be done and here's why. And I would really like to hear some kind of an answer to that, because as it stands now, I think it's a taking of the property values away from people where we have had long-standing traditions of allowing those credits. And then the other part of that would be, you know, what are the other counties doing? You know, the counties that are surrounding us, take out Pinellas because they don't really have any rural areas, I guess, but, you know, Manatee, Pasco, Polk County, what are they doing? Is there anybody else that is doing what we're talking about?
Actually, I did some research, and there was another county that was also proposing to remove wetland credits. That was in Walton County. They tabled this discussion due to the challenges with property rights. So,
Okay, hold on just a second. Did you say Wilson County?
Walton County, Florida.
And I'm sorry, I still don't know which county we're talking about.
I'm not even really exactly sure what part of Florida that's in, but it's called Walton County, Florida.
Oh, Walton County, up in the
Walton
Panhandle.
County.
Walton County, you know, where there's like 30,000 people in the entire county versus 1.5 million in Hillsborough County. I get it. Okay, so I don't know, we're going to be comparing apples to apples on that, but I appreciate you're doing that research. I mean, that's obviously very, very important. But you know, we're taking the lead on doing something, and again, nobody has explained any rationale on this whatsoever. I'm just most concerned about doing that. And even, by the way, in Walton County, it seems like you were indicating their concern is about the reduction in value. And with the stroke of a pen to reduce the value of people and their property, I think is, you know, that's something that we don't really want to be doing. And secondly, by the way, I also want to ask this question. Commissioner Powell asked about whether this would, I think he was just wanted the clarification, whether this would apply to any property in other words, it's only to the properties that are outside the USA, outside of the urban service area. So it would not apply to any of the properties, for example, in any of the 3 municipalities. Is that right?
This would apply, this is specifically for unincorporated Hillsborough County within the rural area.
All right, so what that would tell me also, by the way, you know, coming from Plant City, where we've had some great voluntary annexation take place over the years, is it would tell me there's got to be, if this policy were enacted, there's just got to be hundreds, if not thousands of acres from multiple property owners who would be adjacent to Plant City who would say, hey, take me in. I want to be annexed into the city where I don't have such a concern that I have to deal with that might reduce the value of my property. And it might even give rise to the situation we had a few years ago where in South County, there was talk about creating a 4th municipality. And maybe that's something that they want to reconsider so they don't have to be subject to this, which again, unless somebody can tell me, there's no rhyme, no reason, no rationale for me doing this. But thank you. And please send me that presentation.
Will do.
Thank you, Commissioner Dix. Great comments. Great comments. There anyone else with any questions or any comments out there? For my part, Unica, I just wanted to echo everyone's comments so far. I think the presentation has been great. I think EPC, the Property Appraiser's Office, have both put out tons of really great information. And the conversation that you all had was also really great in responding to the questions that you received from the stakeholders. And I think this has gone a long way to get a lot of things out in front of the public and get them discussed and answer a lot of questions that a lot of us as commissioners had before and probably will have more of going forward, it appears. I had a question, I guess a question for each staff, one pretty simple question. I'll start with you, Unica, just to echo and kind of verify what I heard. There was, oh, did you have something to say, Sean, or?
Just Commissioner Handy has her hand up for you when you have a moment.
I am so sorry. Commissioner Handy, yes, please go ahead.
Sorry, you feel free to continue. I don't want to interrupt what you were in the middle of.
Oh, no, you can go ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay, I do have several comments and questions. I am familiar with other counties that do have a wetland density credit. However, it comes with, I guess I would say it comes with a cost. It comes with sort of what do you get in exchange for your wetland density bump. And for example, and this is a concern that I have, when like we're working on this right now with the Waimama Community Plan, and previously we did, if there is a density bump, there's a community benefit in exchange for that. If there's an affordable housing bump, it's in exchange for affordable housing. What do we get? What is the payoff? What sort of benefit is there if there's a wetland density credit? It certainly is not to the wetland system. And I would caution the use of wetlands, EPC protecting wetlands when actually they regulate wetlands, because there's no actual active protection or management or monitoring of the wetlands that do suffer additional impacts by higher density built up to their edges. So there's been all this talk about property values, but no talk whatsoever about wetland values. And I think it's pretty clear why this elimination was proposed. We, the communities, the citizens, the wetlands, our natural resources, get nothing in exchange for this wetland density credit. And I perhaps Ms. Tapley would be, or Ms. Dougherty would be willing to address. We cannot deny that higher density does have higher impacts on adjacent wetlands. So maybe we need to spend some time talking about how the wetlands are affected by the elimination or non-elimination of this density credit. So I know that was a lot, but whoever wants to respond, please. Thank you.
Yeah, so we do regulate wetlands, any activity in wetlands, any wetland impact. We do have conservation easements over a lot of wetlands that prevent any development, any future development from happening. And we do inspect those conservation easements once every 3 years. But no, we do not go out to all wetlands in the county after there has been development that has occurred adjacent to the wetland. So I am not familiar with the studies that you're talking about documenting the negative effects of wetlands adjacent to higher density areas. But for at least EPC wetlands, we do go out and monitor the wetlands that have conservation easements or that were created through the mitigation process.
Okay, so forgive me for interrupting, but a wetland density credit does not require a conservation easement on the on-site wetland, correct?
To my knowledge, that's correct. We require conservation easements if a mitigation area has either been created for mitigation is over half an acre, or if it's an area where a wetland is going to be restored or enhanced, or we can also accept conservation easements over some uplands. And
Yes,
then there are folks who do voluntarily give EPC conservation easements as well.
yes, but a wetland on a parcel that benefits from the wetland density credit is not automatically put into a conservation easement. So,
No.
so that wetland does not have the benefit of a conservation easement or management or monitoring. That's the point I'm trying to make, is that there is no benefit to the wetland or to that resource for our communities by allowing higher density.
I don't know any agency that will go out and monitor and maintain a wetland on private property after a development has occurred adjacent to it.
Correct. Yes, that's actually the point I'm making. So there is no benefit derived to the wetland, to our resources, to the people of the county as a community by allowing higher density. However, it is very much recognized the benefit of wetlands to our communities and resources, and certainly our downstream water bodies, by regulating and protecting those wetlands. So the point I'm trying to make is no benefit is derived to these resources or to our communities by allowing the higher density, as for example, in the affordable housing situation. So I think what I'm saying is there's this talk of like, why are we doing this? I think that's why we're doing this. I mean, it would be why I would be in favor of doing this, because, or either that, or examine what other counties do that in exchange for the density bump, again, similar to a community benefit in the case of WVR2, for example, or affordable housing, what additional protections, what additional benefits can be derived by allowing this wetland density? I realize that may be a subject for another day, but that's to me, that is what is the missing piece. And our comp plan and all of our existing rules clearly call for wetland protections.
Did you have
I'm
any other,
sorry.
or was that it?
I think that was it. The only, and Ms. Tapley did reference studies pertaining to the effects of higher density on adjacent wetlands. I am not able to cite any such studies right off the top of my head. I think she brings up a very good point. I think it would be very interesting to do so. And that might be something worth bringing to the commissioner's attention at a future date, once we have our hands on any such information we could find. But yeah, sorry to ramble on. That's it.
Oh, no, please, if you have any other comments or questions, please feel free to put them in there. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't leaving dead air out there, so before I get yelled at. And if you want to take a moment to think and toss it over, I'll come back to you again in a couple minutes if you like. I see Commissioner Powell in the queue there, so please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up to to Commissioner Handy's comments, I hear those, and I actually think that her concern is really valid, especially when it comes to the maintaining of our wetlands, and we can't really place a value on the wetlands, so I totally understand that. But I think that the maintenance and the upkeep of the wetlands should be something that is completely different, and it's sort of outside of the scope of what we're talking about here, for wetland density, credits. This is kind of getting back to my question from earlier of, it was said from one of our previous commissioners, I can't recall who, who said that, rooftops ruin, wetlands. And I don't think that's necessarily, the case. But I'm not, a wetland expert. So, if there's some sort of, studies or data or anything that, can be, that's quantitative that we can see, I would love to hear that. But I don't think that it is fair to our farmers and to the people in the rural service area, for us to start taking away, their property rights because of, wetlands that are not going to be maintained, further down, the line potentially. But I definitely think that we should have something that, is either in the land development code, comp plan, or something that calls for, the continuation and the monitoring of, the wetlands and making sure that they're preserved. But I don't think it's, something that we need to take away from the farmers, for something that hasn't even happened yet, as well. You first have to put the rooftops in, you first have to, go in and start putting in all your infrastructure in, and then let that, be the subdivision's problem with the community or the association for the continual, maintenance of that wetland. So I just wanted to add that in there. I do think that, the point is valid that we need to have something, that's in there. And I don't know what department within the county, at least for unincorporated, that is responsible for that, but we should have something, for that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell. All right. Just wanted to go back to my questions really quick before I forgot about them. It's also take some more time, see if any commissioners pop up with questions or anything. And I wanted to make a note also, I see some people in the queue watching us in the public. Just a reminder that this is not an action meeting, so we will not be taking any input from the public today. But when it comes before the Planning Commission for action, or when it does eventually end up at Board of County Commissioners, no such places, you will have lots of opportunity to provide your live comments at that time. So just deal with us for just a moment as we kind of discuss in this information only meeting. My question I wanted to get out really quickly, just to put it to each of you. Unica, echoing kind of Commissioner Handy's statements and the statements that were made before, was there an implicit reason given not by any of us, but by the BOCC who initiated this request for the request?
Sorry, I was muted. When the application was brought to us, the purpose was given for environmental reasons to protect the rural area, as well as see if the proposed amendment would, how it would work with the TDR program that may be coming forth.
Okay, so I'll leave the TDR alone for now. And then my second question, since the purpose was environmental, my second question will go to the EPC, the Environmental Protection Commission. Will this proposal impact wetlands, the environment?
It would not impact wetlands because wetlands are protected from Chapter 111 and the basis of review. So it does not matter for EPC what is built if there's 150 houses or 187 houses on 100 pieces of property. We are still going to protect and regulate any activity within a wetland in Hillsborough County.
Thank you. So it was brought for environmental reasons. It has absolutely no, by our experts, county experts, potential impacts on what it was intended for. My next question is going to go to the property appraiser. So again, I just want to be clear on this. Is there any potential for a diminishing of property owners' values through this action? Is there any potential for that to happen? And if there is a potential for it to happen, is that negative impact balanced in any way, or can we see variances in that impact from property owner to property owner?
there can be variances only in the fact that some properties may be desirable to be developed and others may not. But any property that is being sought after for developmental purposes would suffer from having fewer units that could be built on the site as opposed to an additional property that didn't have that same impact. So.
Okay, thank you, sir. And thank you all for your clarifications. Those are only my three main real questions. And I see Commissioner Cardenas on the line, so definitely want to get his comments and input here. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so, you know, it's interesting to me because when this came up and we were all sitting, getting ready to take a vote and this new thing kind of got added on, you know, I feel like we were all a little bit confused. I think it was explained to us and we weren't sure if we fully understood it because it kind of came out of nowhere. And I feel like we asked to have this session that we're currently having for further clarification, just to make sure we got it right. And now that we've had this session, I feel like I understood it right the first time when it was first explained to us. And the same type of amazement as in where did this come from is still there. So, you know, that 25% number, I've valued many deals for clients or transactions for clients where we're trying to do the underwriting on a potential development or something like that. And 25% is a lot, you know, that little, you know, that little bit of a change could really make a difference in a developer maybe deciding to take action on something or not take action on something. You know, there are different things in properties that come up, you know, an example is like a drainage vault, you know, that's something that adds a big number onto a transaction that somebody might have to put on the property. And, you know, this difference in density could make a difference in their ability to execute on the purchase or not the purchase. So I definitely feel like this greatly affects our constituents, property owners, etc. And it's just kind of interesting because I was hoping to think that maybe I didn't understand it fully the first time, and no, we definitely did. So this kind of just, I think it kind of put the nail in the coffin for a lot of us in that. So that was kind of all I was really looking for. Just wanted to make a couple comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Were there any more questions or comments from the commissioners on the line? Yes, Commissioner Linkus, please go ahead.
I do have one. I guess interesting to hear Commissioner Cardenas' comments, because I just feel like it's interesting how I also was wondering where did this come from in terms of originally how this was in the code. To me, I have to comment that I agree with what Commissioner Handy stated. When a density bonus is offered in planning, it is in exchange for a public benefit, whether that be affordable housing, in putting public art in place, whatever it might be. So I think that the commissioners, my 2 cents on why this came about in terms of the board direction is that this is an attempt to update an old provision that really doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of why you would implement a density bonus in this context. I think that there needs to be some kind of rationale for what the public benefit is, because these are really sensitive, very limited resources that will, to kind of build on the comments that were just said, more development will be incentivized if this is left in place. So I think that I will just return to the comment about why are we looking at this. I think that one of the ways to kind of think about what to do as a next step is to consider tying this to the transferable development rights program. If there is some way that nobody wants to take away property rights, I don't think, I think that that's a pretty, I'd say that's a pretty fairly shared view across this group of commissioners. But if there's no real public purpose for this density bonus for wetland clustering or whatever it is, then I think we look at what is the way to kind of mitigate the property rights impacts if it's taken away. And I think the TDR program could offer an opportunity there.
Thank you, Commissioner Linkus.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Handy is posted in the chat a request to speak again.
Oh, okay, please. Yes, Commissioner Handy, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Sean. I guess I don't see where the raise the hand icon is. Yes, thank you, Commissioner Linkus, for that. I think it brings up a really good point that just because it's there now doesn't mean that it can't be revisited. Maybe it was something that was not properly put in place before, like so many other regulations been revisited over the years. But I think it's clear that there is the concern of property values, and it's clear the effect that it may have on development and density. What is not clear, and I would, just like everyone keeps saying, why did this come about? Why was this asked? It has not been answered or even addressed, as far as I could see. The impact on development has been addressed. If we do not eliminate the density credit, what is the impact on the community? I personally clearly see what the impact on the resources might be. What is the impact on our community? This is not just about property rights and developers. This should be about the entire rural community and what, not just the benefits, but what happens if, what do they get out of it? I don't think that's been addressed at all. So I would like to somehow see that question answered, like, the developers benefit by maintaining a density credit. What happens with the community at large? Thanks.
Question, Commissioner Handy, good question. Commissioner Dowdy.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I assume you can hear me fine. There's been a lot of good discussion and a lot of comments, and I tend to agree with a number of the statements that have been made by our commissioners, and disagree with others. The language that has been discussed about removing this, I mean, I guess I can understand Commissioner Handy and Commissioner Linkus saying they know there ought to be something else, but that's not what has been brought before us. Is it's been just remove this credit. I will take issue with the statement that was made that we don't protect wetlands, that we just regulate wetlands. Well, we regulate wetlands to provide the protection based upon the prevailing thoughts of the time as we went forward, and we as the Planning Commission are not in the business of changing those regulations as far as it goes. So to go to, like Commissioner Powell saying, that one of the commissioners said rooftops damage wetlands. Well, if rooftop damage wetlands, it's because the current regulations allow rooftops to damage wetlands. Okay. And I think you might be hard pressed to have EPC or the Water Management District or DEP or the Army Corps of Engineers state that their regulations damage wetlands. Okay. I guess I'd like to, I'm more along the lines of Commissioner Dix and Commissioner Cardenas. This just makes no sense. The arguments that I'm hearing make no sense to me. I get it. You want to do some transfer of development rights and you want to try to move development out of the rural area into some other area. Great. Create some system to do that. Don't just yank value away from people with no explanation, or just throw it out there to see what kind of conversation comes out about it. I don't know. I think I was pretty clear the first time, and I'm still pretty clear on what this is, and so I don't really have any questions. It's just my comments. I know where I stand on this thing. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Dowdy. Were there any more comments from the commissioners? I just wanted to say also, in addition to Commissioner Dowdy's statements, and sort of in response to Commissioners Haney and Linkus, I kind of see it the same way also when it comes to this issue of taking it out versus leaving it in. The issue before us is removing it. Like, we don't have to prove the benefit. We'd have to prove the benefits to put it in. It's already in, you know what I mean? So I think the argument you're making is kind of a backwards one. And I'm not denying the fact that, you know, what's going on in the rural area doesn't need to be put in check, and we need to protect our wetlands and all this kind of stuff. But I think the issue is the way we're going about it. And in trying to just go at things, you know, unintentional consequences happen. And for me as a planning commissioner, that's one of my biggest like things to watch out for, is people who have the greatest intentions and blindly go at things. And then afterwards we turn around and we go, oops, maybe we shouldn't have done that. And I think this whole process that we've gone through here has developed a lot of information, facts, figures to put out on the table and have a great discussion on. And for me, the bottom line of this thing is, I don't disagree with you again, Commissioners Handy and Linkus, but I don't think it's developed enough for it to be put out there in the way that it's being put out there right now. I think all this stuff that we're doing at the Planning Commission, all this research and all this making all these different departments work together and talk to each other, probably should have happened at the BOCC level, and they should have got the ideas together before it even came down to this level, you know what I mean? So it's not just this kind of haphazard, like, oh yeah, we'll just do this thing. And you know, that for me, that's a big part of this thing. It feels really sloppy. It feels really not well thought out. Commissioner Handy, I know the articles that you talk about that talk about high intensity development impacting wetlands, because I do teach environmental science currently for USF. So I have read those articles and they do exist, but why aren't they present here? Why hasn't the BOCC made that argument? If those arguments exist, as Commissioner Powell said, great, no one's refuting them, put them out there. Let's have these conversations, put them on the table. Those arguments aren't being brought to the table, you know what I mean? And that's a big red flag for me. So I just wanted to add that, and also check around to see if there were any more comments or questions from the commissioners. I'm
Yes,
not seeing any. Yes,
I
go
have
ahead.
one more. Thank
Please.
you. I understand your comment regarding unintentional consequences, but wow, it's time to look at the big picture, folks. We've got unintentional consequences all the way downstream in our water bodies, like to the degree of dead manatees and dead seagrasses. And you know, I do agree, Commissioner Joseph, that these studies absolutely should be brought to the table. They haven't been, and instead, you know, we're bantering it all back and forth. But we are so far beyond thinking about, oh my gosh, the developers are going to lose some money now, when we have far bigger fish to fry with the protection of our resources and our communities and our wildlife and our species. And I think we're at the point now where we need to revisit many things like this. Things that have been brought up before, like individual counties and state jurisdictions on wetlands. Well, that all changed and nobody liked that either. But that's kind of the way of the world. We need to grow and progress in the right direction. And this is one of those directions. So I know you all know how I feel about this, but I think it's a really big picture item. And so that's, you know, I guess that's just my one final comment, that the unintended consequences works both ways. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Handy. Commissioner Linkus, yes.
And if I could just, I also would like to just state, I think this is showing incremental progress on the ability of the local government to take action on and a really important topic. And it's quite clear that the local government ability to take action on wetlands protection is very limited. And I think this is an important step forward on something. And the fact that Florida is harming its wetlands and that our existing development policies do so is fairly clear. Many books have been written about this. So I think I commend the steps being taken to kind of look at this. And again, I also want to reiterate, this idea that property rights are being taken away, I think is quite questionable. We're talking about a bonus. We're talking about an incentive that most homeowners don't have access to. We're talking about something that is an incentive. And usually, I'm just going to reiterate, these come with an exchange of some sort of public good. And the fact that that's not necessarily clear or present here, I think does make it problematic. So it's not, I think, taking away of property rights. It's about not giving a bonus to development.
Good comments, Commissioner Linkus. Thank you. All right, Commissioner Dix, yes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you know, kind of to summarize some things, let's do remember that when the initial density credit was initiated back in the 80s, it was a compromise for the landowner even back then. Because if a landowner had 100 acres way back when, he thought that he could just develop 100 acres and have at it. And then we had the foresight to say, wait a minute, you know, if 10 or 20 of those acres happens to be wetlands, you shouldn't be able to. And so he was saying, well, wait a minute, you're taking away 10 or 20 acres from me. I need to deserve some kind of a compensation or some kind of a compromise, which is why the density credits were initiated to begin with anyway. So now what we're looking at is to try to take this one step further. And it's this chipping away of those rights that is just inequitable. And we're not talking necessarily about what the developer, how much of a profit a developer may make. We're talking about, you know, the value of that property in many cases as ag property, as farm property. And a guy has to be able to go and borrow money in order to plant his crops for the next year's harvest. But he's going to have a potential to not be able to borrow as much and not be able to expand as much and do as much, and providing the benefit of the community of providing crops and feeding our community if you take away the benefits that he already has, the benefits that has been given to that person or that family because of those property rights. I appreciate what some of my other fellow commissioners are saying, and I am wholeheartedly in favor of protecting our wetlands and making certain that nothing happens to them. But it's not just us talking here today. We've had the experts and the EPC, all of us agree they've been doing a great job. They are committed to continuing to do a great job. And they say the change in this will have absolutely no effect to the wetlands whatsoever. So by making it more onerous and by taking away the property rights of the people who already have these, it will not do anything to help further and protect those property, the wetlands and the environment for the rest of us going forward. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Dix. All right. There any more? Yes, Commissioner Cardenas, please go ahead.
You know, I feel like often, I think this topic hit us very different because we're often making decisions and voting on certain things, and we have citizens coming before us and they are talking about, you know, how something may be affecting them, this development or community that's going up may be affecting them at their, you know, at their property, and to a certain extent we're looking at this from the purview of land use and have an understanding of it differently than they do, and we're consistently making those types of decisions. Oftentimes I think almost even it feels like against them, but it's just not our positioning to vote on certain points that they're making. And I think the reason this topic hit us so strongly is because it was something that we clearly saw that we would be affecting, you know, the value of individual rights of property owners. And I just kind of wanted to point that out as part of the reasoning why I think we're kind of a bit up in arms in this, because we are constantly trying to be conscious of of the citizens, and this is one of those topics that just it's most of the time we don't have the opportunity to vote in this way, and this is one time where it's clear that that effect is there. That's about it.
Thank you, Commissioner Cardenas. Great comments. Great comments. All right. Is there anyone else looking to ask any questions of staff or provide any more thoughts?
Yes, this is Vivian again.
Yes, please go ahead, Commissioner Handy.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on the concept that wetlands will be protected regardless of the number of housing densities there are right up to the within the buffer. And I want to point out that, well, that can't possibly be true because we're talking about an entire ecosystem, wetlands and uplands. And I'd like to point out a regulation that the federal government uses under their 404 wetlands permitting program, that they do not consider protection of a wetland as mitigation sufficient unless you have a 300-foot upland buffer adjacent to that protected wetland. Clearly, you can't have one without the other, or you can't have, it's not apples and apples when you've got a wetland with no development and you've got a wetland with low density or a wetland with higher density. That is just not the case. So, and I'm not belittling EPC's efforts or the job that they do. It's just pretty factual that we just become limited. And we are talking about loss of more uplands, we are talking about loss of wildlife corridors, and we are talking about loss of additional buffers for wetlands. So, I mean, let's just be clear on the facts that there's no way that wetlands remain unaffected regardless of the so-called protections or monitoring that we attempt to implement. And I just wanted to clarify that because it is in our federal wetland guideline rules as far as what it takes to consider wetlands fully protected. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Handy. Good comments. Good questions and comments from the commissioners. Were there any more thoughts or questions? I'm not seeing any hands over here, so if I'm skipping anybody, please feel free to speak up and just grab my attention there. I am not seeing anyone else at this point, so I will thank you all personally for your presentations and turn it back over to you, Yanika, to close this thing out, I guess. I don't know, maybe.
Well, again, nothing else. This will conclude the meeting. Again, as you said, Chair Nigel, I thank everybody for their participation. Thank you for your time.